Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are taking a magnifying glass to one of the absolute most famous plot twists in classic literature, the climax of Jane Eyre. Now, we all know the story, right? But today, we aren't looking at the romance. We are looking at the math. We're going to completely deconstruct this beloved literary climax to show you how a masterpiece of fiction temporarily, abandons human reality entirely just to give us a picture-perfect ending. Picture this for a second. On one side, we have Jane Eyre, literally starving on the moors, knocking on a random door in desperate poverty. Inside, she just happens to find her long-lost cousins, and then a few weeks later, boom, she discovers she's inherited £20,000 from an uncle she never even met. Suddenly, she is rich, independent, and an equal. Now, what's really fascinating about this setup is that this transition isn't the climax of a realistic novel. It is, for all intents and purposes, the climax of a fairy tale. To truly understand just how bizarre this is, we need to look at where this massive fortune actually comes from. Jane's uncle, John Eyre, is also the uncle of St. John, Diana, and Mary Rivers. He's their mother's brother. So why on earth did he leave absolutely everything to a complete stranger like Jane and nothing at all to his own sister's children? Well, because he had a bitter family dispute with their father. The absolutely crucial point here is that this will is not an act of love. It's an act of pure spite. He literally just wanted to punish them. Jane is simply the accidental beneficiary of a messy family war. Now, let's focus on the actual amount, £20,000. It's a massive, beautiful number. But this number completely ignores the messy, chaotic realities of inherited wealth. Let's be real. In real life, sudden inheritances are incredibly complicated. You're dealing with massive taxes, astronomical legal fees, property valuations, endless paperwork, the whole shebang. But here, it's just a clean, perfectly packaged astronomical windfall. Which brings up a really fun question. Why exactly 20,000? Why not, say, 19,432? The answer is pretty simple. Because 20,000 is a fairy tale number. It's perfectly round, it's incredibly memorable, it is deeply satisfying, it's exactly the kind of number an author chooses when they just want the reader to feel pleased and comfortable, completely sidestepping the headache of how money actually transfers in the real world. To truly get why what happens next is so unbelievable, we have to remember who Jane Eyre actually is and how she has always viewed money. In her own words from chapter 2, she says, "I was a discord at Gates Hall. I was like nobody there. I had nothing in harmony." Jane is absolutely terrified of poverty. She never romanticizes being poor. She hates it. Being a dependent orphan with absolutely no resources is a source of deeply painful humiliation that really defines her entire identity. And this creates a massive contradiction. Think about her reality. This is a woman who took a grueling job at Lowood just to gain a tiny bit of independence. A woman who valued every single shilling she ever earned and eventually fled Thornfield with exactly 20 shillings, literally just one single pound in her pocket. She is fiercely, fiercely careful with money. And yet, the fairy tale suddenly drops a massive fortune of £20,000 right into her lap. Okay, let's do the cold, hard math that the novel desperately hopes you will just skip over. As a governess at Thornfield, Jane's salary was £30 a year. Her total inheritance? Roughly 666 years of her salary. When she decides to split it equally with her 3 cousins, she keeps £5,000 for herself, which is about 166 years of her salary. The portion she just gives away is £15,000. That equates to 500 years of wages. I want you to let that number truly sink in for a moment. 500 years. This is a woman who spent her entire childhood dreading poverty, a woman who worked relentlessly as a teacher and a governess, who fled Thornfield with only £1 to her name, and she just gives away half a millennium of income. The sheer absurdity of someone who genuinely feared starvation doing this without a second thought is honestly mind-boggling. Because how would a real, complex human being actually process this kind of world-shaking news? They'd naturally go through a very specific sequence. First off, utter shock. You probably wouldn't even be able to speak. Second, an overwhelming wave of relief, just knowing you'll never have to beg or be dependent on anyone ever again. Third, pure joy. And finally, calculation. You'd probably think, okay, maybe I can give my cousins a really generous gift, maybe £500 each, maybe 1,000, but you would secure your own survival first. But instead of that completely natural human reality, we get this.
St. John tells her she's incredibly rich and she doesn't even gasp. She doesn't sit down in disbelief. She doesn't ask a single clarifying question about the money. She just immediately says, I will divide it with my cousins. I should be glad to have them share it. Instantly, eagerly. Come on, this isn't how a real, flawed person behaves. This is how a saint in a stained glass window behaves.
Now let's pivot to the other side of this equation, the Rivers family. These siblings are the natural heirs. They are the actual children of the man who quarreled with John Eyre in the first place. Jane is, for all intents and purposes, a complete stranger who just walked in off the moors. Imagine being entirely cut out of your own uncle's massive fortune by a mysterious cousin who just showed up out of nowhere. The psychological fantasy of this playing out smoothly is wild. In reality, a humiliating and spiteful will like this would ignite absolute chaos. You would normally see deep resentment, intense jealousy, years of bitterness, and almost certainly some really nasty lawsuits. But in the novel's version, the siblings just smile and express profound gratitude. They literally just say, thank you. The author magically erases all human conflict because the novel desperately needs a clean, frictionless ending. And hey, what about the man who actually made this happy ending possible? Think about it for a second. Does anyone mourn John Eyre? This is the uncle who provided the massive fortune and actively spent his precious time searching for Jane before he died. Is there a funeral? Does anyone visit his grave? Does anyone say a single, solitary kind word about him? The punchy reality is no, not at all. He is entirely forgotten the exact moment the money is distributed. His death isn't treated as a tragedy or even really acknowledged by the characters who directly benefit from it. He is totally reduced to a pure transaction. He existed solely in this narrative to die and leave a perfectly round number behind to magically fix our protagonist's problems. And you know, this really highlights a glaring inconsistency in Jane's character. For hundreds of pages, we see Jane as a strict moral Puritan. She refuses to be Rochester's mistress despite deeply, deeply loving him, fiercely valuing her moral integrity over her own immediate happiness. She has incredible rigor. But when it comes to her financial future, suddenly there is zero calculation, no mutiny of the soul, just instant, unconditional generosity. The two halves of this character simply do not fit together. Which brings us to the absolutely crucial literary concept at play here, Deus ex machina. Literally translated, it means a god from the machine descending to suddenly solve every problem. This inheritance and Jane's unbelievable reaction to it isn't genuine character development. It is a forced narrative compulsion by the author. The author desperately needs Jane to be a saint right here, right now, to secure a perfectly clean, happy ending, even if it contradicts everything we know about her. So what should you take away from this explainer? Well, the inheritance number is simply too perfectly round. Jane's massive generosity is incredibly instant for someone who used to scrape by on 30 pounds a year. The cousins are completely devoid of natural resentment, acting far too grateful. And the man who made it all happen is entirely forgotten. This entire plot point has been transformed into a pure symbol of virtue, making absolute zero psychological sense. As we close out today's explainer, I want to leave you with one final thought to really chew on. Is a system of justice that is too neat, too fast, and too cruel really justice at all? Because as we've seen with this magical inheritance, the novel's final ledger completely forces reality aside to instantly reward the good and punish the wicked. But does that make for the most honest story? Keep that in mind because in our next explainer, we'll be diving even deeper into exactly how this author balances those ultimate scales. Thanks for joining me, and as always, keep questioning what you read.